Beneath 100 days of summer and forests scarred by ancient ice lies a region America never chose to crown with cities. While Boston and New York soared, the rugged heart of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and northern New York pushed back with thin soil, bitter winters, and silent rivers. Why did the deep Northeast surrender its future to the coasts, and what hidden cost has that decision left behind? The answer begins where the mountains decide who wins. Ridges rise like the bones of the earth, their silhouettes cutting sharp against the pale sky. Beneath these summits, the ground tells a story older than any nation. Ancient glaciers, thick as 2 city blocks, once dragged their icy weight across Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and northern New York. They scraped the land to bedrock, then retreated, leaving behind a patchwork of stony till and shallow soils. Walk a field in the interior. Boot soles crunch against granite shards, soil barely deeper than a spade's blade. In some places, a thin skin of earth struggles to cover the stones, only 10 to 50 centimeters deep. Farmers a century ago wrestled with boulders, 50, even 200 per acre, hauling them to the edges of fields, piling them into walls that still snake through the woods. Long, smooth drumlins stretch across northern New York, shaped by the southward flow of ice. Their gentle slopes offered grazing, but they're compacted till resisted every plow. In Vermont and New Hampshire, glacial eskers twist through the forests, ridges of sand and gravel, dry in summer, but too unstable for crops. Where the glaciers paused, they left behind moraines and boggy depressions, trapping water and making drainage a constant battle. Most of the land is underlain by acidic podzoles, their pale layers starved of nutrients, pH hovering between 4 and 5.5. Roots find little to hold on to, and frost reaches deep each winter. Only rare pockets, like the clay-rich soils of the Champlain Valley, offered enough depth and fertility for real farming. Everywhere else, the cost of clearing and working the land soared. The very ground beneath the deep Northeast set the first and hardest terms for anyone hoping to build, plant, or stay. Winter. In the deep Northeast arrives early and lingers late. Snow and ice settle into the pines, cold breath hangs low in the valleys, and the world narrows to the size of a porch light. What matters here is not just the weather, but the way the land itself shapes possibility. Forests. Wrap the hills like a dark blanket, so dense that sunlight barely reaches the forest floor. Pine, spruce, and hemlock crowd every slope, their roots gripping thin soils, making each acre of cleared farmland a triumph of sweat and stubbornness. The growing season, often less than 100 days, leaves fields idle under frost while other regions plant and harvest twice. Even in summer, cold air pools in the low spots, and hard frosts can strike in August. Wide aerial of endless dark forest, then a slow pan to narrow, rushing rivers. Rivers cut through these woods, but they run shallow and fast, tumbling over rocks and plunging down falls. None of them gather enough water to carry ships, or even the heavy barges that farther south turn towns into trade centers. The Penobscot and Androscoggin, the Saranac and the Ausable, these names fill local maps, but their channels twist and narrow, broken by rapids and ledges. Early surveys measured depths and found only a few feet of water in the dry months, far too little for reliable navigation. Graphic of a road being blasted out of rock, timber bridges creaking under load. Without broad, deep rivers, there was no easy way to move crops or timber to distant markets. Building roads through forest and stone cost 2 to 5 times more than in the valleys. Every mile demanded blasting, bridging, and endless maintenance. Where the Midwest loaded grain onto riverboats bound for New Orleans. Here, even a wagon load of hay might take days to reach the nearest port. The land set high barriers, not just for growing food, but for the very idea of a city rising from the woods. When engineers and investors scanned the map for future routes, they saw easier corridors elsewhere, and the deep Northeast remained a patchwork of small clearings and silent rivers. Surveyors and financiers gathered over heavy maps, tracing the easiest routes for moving goods and people across the Northeast. Their fingers followed the wide, flat valleys, Hudson, Mohawk, Connecticut, where rivers ran deep enough for barges and the land itself offered a path of least resistance. When the Erie Canal opened in the early 19th century, it did more than connect Lake Erie to the Atlantic. It created a cheap freight corridor, slashing the cost of moving a ton of wheat from Buffalo to New York City to a fraction of overland hauling. Cargo that once crawled over stony hills now floated, almost effortless, to the coast. The lesson was not lost on railroad engineers. Early rail surveys measured grades, counted curves, and calculated the price of every blasted ridge. Reports warned that pushing tracks through the heart of the Green Mountains or the Adirondacks would double or triple construction costs, for little hope of profit. Investors steered clear, and instead rails hugged the valleys, mirroring the old canal routes, feeding Boston, New York, and the ports that already pulsed with trade. Each new line tightened the grip of the harbors, drawing more capital, more labor, and more goods into their orbit. As the decades passed, this pattern hardened. Factories, banks, and universities clustered where ships and trains converged. The deep Northeast, boxed in by its own rough terrain, watched as the flow of money and people bypassed its uplands. The feedback loop was relentless. The more the coast grew, the more it pulled in, leaving the interior tied to timber, stone, and dreams of roots that never came. Granite dust clings to the sleeves of a stonecutter in Barre, Vermont, a faint grit that tastes like labor and time. The sharp ring of chisels carries through the air, bouncing off towering stacks of gray stone, and the sound feels both ancient and relentless. Slow pan over quarry faces, close-ups of chisels and falling dust. Barre's quarries once sent monuments across the country, memorials for presidents and soldiers, headstones for families far from Vermont. Immigrants from Italy and Scotland filled the carving sheds, shaping rough boulders into angels and arches. By the early 1900s, more than half of Vermont's 80 granite quarries crowded around Barre. The Rock of Ages quarry shipped thousands of tons each year, but Barre itself never swelled beyond 20,000 people. The granite built no skyline, just rows of neat houses, church steeples, and the steady rumble of freight trains bound for distant cities. To the northeast, Berlin, New Hampshire, pulsed with the mills. Steam drifted above the Androscoggin River as generations of families filed through the gates, their days marked by the mill whistle and the log drives. In the 1940s, Berlin's mills produced more paper than some entire states, feeding the presses of New York and Boston. Yet prosperity rarely left the mill yard. When global markets shifted, the mills shuttered, and Berlin's population dropped by half. The scent of sawdust lingers, heavier than hope. Archive footage of mill whistle, logs floating downriver, empty factory floors. Lake Placid, on the edge of the Adirondacks, lived by the season. Summer crowds and Olympic dreams filled hotels, but when the snow melted, the streets emptied. Tourism brought quick bursts of wealth, a new ski lift, a new lodge, but never the steady growth of a city. Each boom left behind empty cabins and shuttered shops. Across the Northeast, these towns burned bright, but they never grew into cities. Census tallies show the median age in these uplands creeping higher each decade, now well above 45 in many towns. Schoolyards shrink, while town meetings fill with gray heads. Young families often leave for coastal cities, drawn by jobs and faster connections. In places like East Millinocket, nearly half of households still lack reliable high-speed internet, despite federal grants and orange fiber spools lining the back roads. Local officials plead for crews to finish the work, knowing that every missed connection means another family, another business may look elsewhere. The old pattern of isolation lingers, not just in distance, but in digital gaps and empty storefronts. Aging residents recall mill shifts and granite dust, but now face a future where the world moves online and the deep Northeast risks falling further behind. Title card: today's crossroads, possibility in the pines. Fresh tracks wind through snow at dawn, leading to a lodge bustling with winter guests, the air sharp and metallic, the scent of wood smoke and hot coffee. Nature tourism now brings billions each year to the deep Northeast. Skiers at Killington, hikers in the Adirondacks, leaf peepers filling country roads from September to October. In summer, lakeside cabins and mountain trails draw crowds far beyond the region's permanent population. the quiet towns swelling with the sound of boats and bicycles, then settling back to silence. Towns like Lake Placid and Stowe depend on these seasonal surges, their main streets alive with visitors, and quiet again by March. A new wave of remote workers arrives, laptops open in old mill lofts and lakeside rentals, coffee shops and taverns becoming co-working hubs. After 2020, broadband crews strung fiber through Barr and Millinocket, making it possible for hundreds of new residents to log on from the woods. Wind turbines now spin on Tug Hill ridges, and solar panels glint beside dairy barns, renewable energy companies betting on the land's untapped power. The deep Northeast may never rival Boston or New York in size, but its future could belong to those who see possibility in the pines, who choose the vast sky and steady work over the roar of the big cities. In a nation defined by growth, the deep Northeast stands as a quiet counterpoint, proof that geography still shapes destiny. As cities swell elsewhere, these forests and mountains remind us, not every place is meant to be remade. The land keeps its own counsel, a quiet and stubborn logic written in stone, ice, and evergreen. Share your thoughts below.